to be scoring in major, other keys again. We did G major in the video before. We started off with C major. So just like in the last video, I'm going to show you how here in C major, we don't have anything next to the clefs, okay, and that'd be in between the clefs and the time signature, the 4/4 here. But when we do choose to add a new key, we do see there are sharps, and when we look at the sharps that are here, if you read them in order, you see F, C, G, D. Now, if you know your circle of fifths and you're well studied in this is no problem. It's going to make perfect sense. If you don't, that's where this gets confusing. So check out my video on the circle of fifths, and I also recommend having the circle of fifths somewhere in your house, printed out, or somewhere where you can look at it. It's going to help you make sense of the keys. So like I was saying, we have E major with the sharps that I just told you. As we see, these sharps are both next to the treble clef and the bass clef. In other words, it's on the bottom line here and the top line here. Because of this, anytime when I write any of these notes, so here I see all the notes that are sharp in the key. I have an F, C, G, D. And what you'll notice is there's no sharps. I don't have to distinguish that they're sharp. This is what's good about sheet music, is instead of having to think about F sharp and G sharp, C sharp, D sharp, and all those, you don't have to. We're just writing the notes. So we know the notes that are in the key, but that's already in the key signature is what they call it here, with the sharps in between the clef and the time signature. So now anytime, no matter where we put the F, it could be in any octave, it could be down here. We could even do an F way up here. No matter what F we choose, this is F sharp, because our key signature is telling us anytime we have that note F, then it is F sharp. And that's already taken care in the beginning here, and everything after it, unless there's another direction telling you to do so. So that's why I think this is a lot less complicated than a lot of times when people are using MIDI. Although I don't use MIDI that often, so I can't say too much. But oftentimes when I've used MIDI, and I've seen people using MIDI, if let's say they were using this key, then they would have to think every time of putting that F sharp, every time the G sharp, every time the C sharp, and every time the D sharp. But here when you're writing music, you don't think of any of that. And with the way that I labeled the chords that correlate with the note here at the top, since we're using the major scale, it makes it really easy. We can see the chords and the notes, and we don't have to think of a whole lot. We don't even have to think of major and minor. We can keep that in mind if we want to. But in fact, all that just has to do with the key that you're using. So here when you're writing in the spaces and lines on the sheet music, it really doesn't matter. And you can just think of the notes and the notes in the chord that you're using. So here we have E major. I'm going to start in the first measure here. We only have 3 measures. In the first video, it was sort of based around quarter notes. In the last video, I showed an approach where I used whole notes as a placeholder, and then from those whole notes, I connected the notes in between them, and at the end, there were no more whole notes. But this time, I'm going to show you a half note approach, just to show you a different approach in each of these videos. So again, we're starting with E. I'm going to have a goal in this one to where I start in the middle register, maybe go down a little bit in the beginning, and then at the end, I'm going to end up somewhere in the upper register. So put a placeholder of a B here at the end, and that'll just remind me of what I want to do. And instead of putting that B there, I'm thinking now I'm actually going to put the B in the last half of this measure, so on beat 3 and 4. But on beats 1 and 2, I actually want to make it a chord 5 here, and then I'm going to end on a chord 1. And to change things up, since I'm basing it on the half notes, we could do that. We could do 2 chords per measure and just make that a goal. So I like to label things. I'm going to start off on the tonic chord in the first measure here. I could also label as I go, but I'm trying to show different methods here. So for a different method in this video, I'll instead choose the chords that I'm going to use, and I'll label that and I'll fill it in. I think I just want to do a 1, 4, 6, 5. And I'm going to figure out how to integrate this. So here I'll have the 1, 4. Okay, then here in measure 2, I wanted to do chord 6, but I also didn't want to repeat chord 4, so I just did 1, 6. Okay, now to further show a different approach and just to do things differently in this video, I'm going to be in measure 2 here. I'm going to start in the bass voice. I'm going to start writing some stuff here in measure 2, and then because I have measure 1 and 3 surrounding that, then that will help inspire and influence what I'm going to put in measure 1 and in the last measure. Okay, so I'm actually going to start on chord 6 here. I'm just going to do half note placeholders for now. That's going to be the style of this video, and I'm not going to overthink it too much, but I'm going to put enough thought into it to where it doesn't sound random and uninspired or like I just rushed it or something. Okay, chord 6, we have the notes C sharp, E, and G sharp. But when we look at the staff here, when we look at the lines and spaces, again, we're not having to think about the sharps, and all we really have to think about is chord 6 is the notes C, E, and G. Of course, the knowledge of these other things, being aware of these other things is also good, but here as a beginner you can see don't actually have to think about these things when you're just writing the notes and when you're just thinking of the chords. So I'm just going to make this real simple. I'm going to do an E below. I could choose an E here. Again, I think that's kind of a little low sometimes. So instead I'm going to choose the E right here, and then I'm going to choose a C above, and I'm just going to do a C here. Again, it's C sharp, but as we see, it's just the note C when I put it there in the space. And also again, for these videos, I'm just doing 2 voices, make it simple. I have plenty other videos about harmonizing, counterpoint, 3 voices, 4 voices, so you can check out my channel. I have playlists and stuff where the videos are organized. You'll find a lot of good stuff there. Okay, now I'm going to back up to the chord before this, which is the tonic chord, chord 1, and we have an E, G, and B as our notes. Again, I could every time say E, G sharp, and B, but I already know G sharp's in the key. It shows it right there in the key signature, and for me it's a little too much, and when I'm writing my music I just think, okay, E, G, B, that's the chord. I also see that it's a major chord, and I'm just aware of that. Major and minor chords sound different. Okay, now there's a few things here. There's something called a root position chord, and there's inversions of chords. I'm going to choose to do a root position chord in this bar, which is going to start with E on the bottom, the first note of the chord, and then I'm going to put a G above that. I'll explain why I chose this G in a second. But first off, the reason for me choosing the root position chord is because here I have an inverted chord. This was chord 6. So just overview, I had the notes C, E, and G, and I chose an E, which is that third of the chord, instead of that first note of the chord. So it's a good trick just to have root position chords and first inversion chords alternating. And of course everything's a balance, and you don't want things to be too repetitive either, so you want to think about all these things while you're doing that. Okay, and just like the last video, these half notes are placeholders. I'm going to put notes in between this, and then when we go into the next video, which will be the last video for the other major keys, we're going to go into a key that uses flats. We're going to make that less scary. We're not going to be scared of keys that use flats anymore, and then again I'm going to have a different approach. Okay, so I'm going to continue with this where I'm just doing the half notes for now, and I'm going to actually fill in the rest of this just with half notes so we can see this as a way of completing this. Okay, so I'm going to go before this. I'm going to go in the top voice. We have chord 4 that uses an A, C sharp, and an E, so I could do a C right here, and then it could kind of do a step up here and then a leap to the next measure. But I kind of like this idea where I put an E here. We have a 4th leap up to the E and the B, and then the E goes up to a G, a 3rd little leap. Okay, now I'm going to skip over to the end. This might seem kind of weird, but now I'm going to go to that last chord, the 1. I chose a B right there. It's just a placeholder. It's not like I have to do that note. That was the idea. But I do like that idea because I started with a B here, and then I'm going to a B an octave up at the end. It starts and ends on the same note. There's an octave difference. I like that. So I'm just going to choose the note down below. Of course, I want to complete the chord as much as possible. I'm only doing 2 voices here. I think it would be a good choice to choose E. If I have E and B, that's a 5th. You know it's going to be that E chord missing the G. If I ended with just G and B, technically G sharp and B, then you might not know if it's a incomplete G chord, which would be your G, B, D, or if it is that E chord, E, G, B. So I'm trying to make it very clear. Furthermore, I'm going to choose this note E because you really notice when it gets below the bass staff and it starts to get real low here, and it's going to add a sort of effect that's going to emphasize the fact that this is the end, because we're going up extra high and we're going down extra low. This alone is going to catch the ears, but it's often something that you'll see at the ending of pieces or the very final chord of something. Things will go very low, and especially things to go extra high. Okay, now I'm just going to look at the measure before this, the 5 chord. We have B, D sharp, and F. So I know I'm going to add some notes in the middle of this. I'm not going to do anything too crazy, so I'm keeping that in mind. So there's some interesting options here. Could choose a B. We're going down pretty low. We're also going to end on a B. I have the D and I have the F, and I think I'm going to go in this register here, just looking at the notes surrounding it. Personally, I think D is going to be a good choice for me. I'm also thinking B would be a good choice, but then I kind of have to make my way all the way up to the B. I'm already doing B as my last note. Also, if I choose the note D, it's going to establish the fact that this is the 5 chord more, because we do have D in chord 5, B, D, F, but we don't have D in chord 1, which is after it, E, G, B, but if I did choose the note B, that's in both of those chords. Okay, so now I'm going to look at the bass voice. I'm thinking B and F because I already have the D there. I'm going to choose B here because it's going to help me get down way down here for this E, and it's sort of in the middle of the 2 notes surrounding it. We see the octave difference between the E and the E. So we're sort of helping that octave. And we have a note basically in the middle of that. Okay, now I have the first measure where I don't have the bass filled in, and I'm just going to keep it blank for now. It might seem kind of boring and uninspired, but I'm going to have the melody come in first, and then the bass voice will come in the second measure and continue in the third measure. Okay, now it's time to start changing these half notes and make this more interesting. So I'm going to start in the first measure here, and we see a gap of a fourth between this B and this E. So what I'm going to do is actually start with 2 eighth notes, go up to a quarter note, and that'll get us to that half note where we have chord 4. I'm just going to keep it like that because I like the sound of that. And it's a little different than what you're going to see as an opening for a lot of other things, so it has a unique quality to it. Now that's already done. I'm going to go to the second measure, and I'm going to change this into quarter notes. I'm just going to fill in the note E. So I have an E and a G here. I already have the note E down below here, so I'm going to change this into a quarter note as well. And I'm going to go down to a B, and now that's happening at the same time while the upper voice is going down to the E. So we have an E and we have a B, still 2 notes that occur in the chord. I'm not trying to focus on any complex music theory, anything like that. Otherwise, I'd say this is a fourth, and you might want to think about that a certain way, but we're going to see it's going to sound fine the way that it is. So we're just thinking real simple here, just notes that occur in the chord. Okay, so we have that, and that's what I'm going to do for this chord. I may have not mentioned it, but in the first chord that I have, the chord 1 in the first measure, I do have this passing note here. The 1 chord has the notes E, G, and B, and I have a C here. The C doesn't exist in the chord, but it exists in between this B and this D here, and it's just existing in the middle of that. It's called a passing note. So it's totally fine, and it actually sounds good. Okay, so I actually decided to add some eighth notes here in this first chord. It might have been because I wanted to add this passing note here to approach this fourth interval between the bass voice and this voice, but I don't want anything too complex here, so I'm just putting these eighth notes here, and it's going to be similar to the first measure where I had the 2 eighth notes. It had the passing tone in the middle, and then it led me to a quarter tone, and here we have the same thing in the second measure. We have that passing tone, and that leads us to this quarter note. And because I added these eighth notes here in the beginning, it's rather quick, and especially compared to this half note sort of pause that we have in the measure before. And since this half note and this note above it are a third away, I'm going to again add one of these passing tones, first changing this to a quarter note, and then adding a passing tone in between these 2 notes. The E and the G now have a passing tone of an F. So this is where you can also add a passing tone going from one measure to the next measure, where we see this is a note in a chord here, and this in the next measure is a note in the chord here, and they're just that third away like we've been doing, and we have that passing note. Okay, now here's a simple lesson. Sometimes it's good just to keep it simple, and sometimes it sounds all right, or it sounds good when you keep it simple. And then furthermore, sometimes it can actually begin to sound worse when you think about it too much, when you try editing things around too much. So we came up with this very simple idea. I'm going to analyze it really quickly, just kind of say what's going on. So let's just briefly go over what I did here, listen to it, and then I'll go over a little more at the end maybe. Okay, so we see it started a little quicker with the eighth notes. We have the quarter notes as well, and then we have a repetitive thing going from the first measure to the second measure with those eighth notes in the beginning to the quarter note, and then in the second measure it slows down here with the half note, and we have a slower last measure. So now let's give it a listen. Okay, so there we go. That's it for this video. Just a simple scoring in E major. We see the more you learn about the sheet music, the less scary it becomes. And then after a while, like me, it might become your preferred method of writing down music because it makes so much sense and it's so much easier when you want to think about, let's say, writing a melody. And then if you want to put that same melody in another key, I don't want to explain too much here, but like I was showing you with the different key signatures, it tells you what key you're in, so you can take this melody and put it in a different key, and you don't have to think about all the flats and the sharps or whatever is in that other key. All you have to do is put it in the other key, and the key signature takes care of the rest. That's just another thing. I think really sheet music makes all this a lot simpler, and that's kind of what I'm trying to show here, is that once you understand this, it actually makes it a lot easier to write music. It's like this is here to help you. And on top of that, it's not that hard to read music. If you just study a little bit and you practice a little bit, you're almost never going to forget it. Like I was teaching in my Making Sheet Music Less Intimidating series, I started off saying there's only 7 notes here. And besides the flats and the sharps, there are only 7 notes. You only have to remember the placement of 7 notes, and not only that, in the beginning you just have to remember certain placeholders and the notes around that, like I was teaching in that series of videos. And then after you do that for long enough, you just look and you know what note you're looking at. It just becomes second nature. And also with sheet music, you can do this anywhere. If you have sand and you have a stick, you can draw lines in the sand and start writing notes. I mean, you can literally do this anywhere. Especially if you have a pencil, paper, or notepad or something like that, you can just write down musical ideas all day. And then with that, you can also write down musical ideas, listen to them like your MuseScore, listen to a playback. Then you can get better and better at taking the ideas that are in your head and writing them on a piece of paper and making it sound just like how it sounded in your head. Like many skills, this is something that you can practice towards. A lot of people think that you're either born a musician or you're not. And I'd like to say from firsthand experience, I struggled a lot with music because I didn't understand what I was doing. And just with the way I think, it really fumbled my creative process, not understanding certain things like chords and keys. And then furthermore, when I saw people that were what I consider the best musicians and guitarists, songwriters, they always understood at least chords and keys. And oftentimes I was surprised at how much stuff they actually knew. They knew some complex music theory they could write for strings, and it really shows in the music. So studying all the theory for me actually helped me be able to write music, be able to learn how to play the drums, to keep a rhythm, to keep a beat, to stay in the pocket. Some people, I think, learn more naturally, and I think with some people, they need to kind of understand what they're doing more, or there's just something that blocks them from being able to let loose and play a bunch of notes on a piano when they understand that they don't know what they're doing. And like me, especially if you understand that there are chords and there are keys, I just didn't understand what the heck that meant. I knew there was that concept and you needed to understand that because that's what made music. I did understand that. But then when I started studying music, it opened up this whole new understanding of music. And like I was saying, basically, it just made me a better musician. I've heard other people say this as well. So just know that if you struggle with music, there's a possibility that you might just want to study some more stuff and understand what you're doing. And that might be all that you need. Okay, so that's it for this video. Scoring in E major. We tried to make it less scary. We're going to move on to the next video. It'll be the last in the Scoring in Major series. And we're going to check out a key that has flats. After this, we're going to check out relative keys. We're going to check out relative major in a video. Then we're going to check out relative minor. That'll lead us into scoring with minor, to where we're going to check out scoring with the harmonic minor and the melodic minor. So thanks for watching. If you're confused about anything, had any question, leave a comments. If you have any ideas for any upcoming videos, leave that in the comments. If you enjoyed this video and you want to help me out, you can give me a thumbs up, and I'm going to be uploading a lot more videos all the time, and I already have a lot of videos uploaded, so stay tuned for more videos. Until next time, take care and goodbye.